Welcome to Phrasal Verb Practice. This is the place to learn real English, one phrasal verb at a time. My name is Marissa, and I'll walk you through this learning journey. Hello everyone, trust you're all well. In today's session, we'll cover and practice the phrasal verb get around. So, let's talk about how people actually use get around in real life. First, we often use get around to talk about moving from place to place. When we say get around, we usually mean how someone travels in a city or an area. For example, she gets around by bus. It's easy to get around this city. He gets around on a bike. Now, there's another common use of get around. We also use get around when we talk about avoiding a rule, a problem, or an obstacle. In this case, get around means finding a way past something that makes things difficult. For example, he got around the rules. They found a way to get around the problem. She tried to get around the system. There's one more very common use of get around. We use get around to talk about finally doing something we've been delaying. You'll usually hear it as get around to plus an ing verb. For example, I finally got around to calling her. He never got around to fixing the sink. We got around to cleaning the house. So, the main idea behind get around is pretty clear. It's about finding a way past something. That could be distance, a rule, or even a delay. Now, just to give you a quick sense of how get around sounds in other languages. In Spanish, it's like desplazarse, evitar, or finalmente hacer algo. In French, people often say se déplacer or contourner. In Portuguese, deslocarse or contornar. In Italian, spostarsi or aggirare. In German, sich fortbewegen or umgehen. In Japanese, idou suru, kaibi suru or youyaku suru. And in Chinese, sun chu zhou dong, zhao guo or zhong yu qu zuo. So, when do people usually use get around? People use get around when they talk about transportation. They use it when they explain how they avoid problems or rules. They use it when talking about procrastination. And they use get around when they finally do something they've been putting off. Let's look at a few examples to recap. She gets around easily without a car. It's hard to get around without public transport. He got around the company rules. We finally got around to finishing the project. I never got around to replying to that email. Now let's talk about how get around works grammatically. Get around is an inseparable phrasal verb. That means the verb and the particle stay together. We don't split them. So we say, get around the problem. Get around the city. Typical structures, get around plus noun. Get around to plus verb ing. Most of the time, you'll hear get around followed by a noun, or you'll hear get around to plus an ing verb. Now, let's practice. First, you're going to listen to a text about everyday life. Then you'll hear another one in a professional or office setting. Are you ready? Let's start. Last summer, I decided to spend more time exploring my neighborhood. I don't have a car, so learning how to get around became part of my daily routine. Most mornings, I walk to the bus stop and use public transport to get around the city. It's not always fast, but it works, and I've learned how to get around without stressing too much. One day, my friend asked how I managed to get around so easily. I told her it just takes a bit of planning. Knowing routes and schedules really helps you get around when you don't drive. She laughed, and said she still hadn't get around to setting up a transit app on her phone. At home, I have a long list of things I keep delaying. I kept telling myself I would get around to organizing my closet, but somehow there was always something else to do. The same thing happened with fixing my bike. It sat there for weeks until I finally got around to taking it to the shop. Sometimes life forces you to get around small problems. When my internet stopped working, I had to get around the issue by using my phone as a hotspot. It wasn't perfect, but it helped me get around the situation until things were fixed. On weekends, my family visits, and our schedules never match. We've learned to get around that by planning meals ahead of time. If we don't, we never get around to eating together. By Sunday evening, I usually think about the week ahead. I check my calendar, make a short list, and decide what I really need to get around to doing. Life doesn't always move smoothly, but once you learn how to get around obstacles and delays, things feel a little lighter and a lot more manageable. Great, that was the first text. How many times did you hear the phrasal verb of the day? Now, let's move on to the second text. At work, my days are rarely simple, and learning how to get around small obstacles has become part of my routine. Our office is spread across 2 buildings, so I often have to get around between meetings without much time to spare. Knowing shortcuts and schedules helps me get around the day more smoothly. Last month, our team started a new project with very tight deadlines. Almost immediately, we ran into a system issue that slowed everything down. Instead of waiting for a full fix, we looked for a temporary way to get around the problem so we could keep moving. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed us to get around the delay and meet our first milestone. There are also tasks that everyone keeps postponing. For me, it was updating a long report. I kept telling myself I would get around to it later. Days passed, and it stayed on my list. One afternoon, my manager asked about it, and that was the moment I finally got around to finishing it. Once it was done, I wondered why I hadn't get around to it sooner. In meetings, we sometimes face rules or processes that slow decisions. When that happens, the team looks for creative ways to get around unnecessary steps while still following the guidelines. It's all about finding a balance and knowing how to get around obstacles without causing new ones. Emails can also pile up quickly. I've learned that if I don't get around to answering important messages early, they become harder to manage. Now, I block time each morning to get around my inbox before it takes over my day. By the end of the week, I usually review what's coming next. I check what still needs attention and decide what I should get around to first on Monday. Work rarely goes exactly as planned, but once you know how to get around challenges, delays, and unfinished tasks, everything feels more manageable and a lot less stressful. Great, that was the second text, and that's all for today. Thank you so much for following this channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.